Hi, I'm
Yes.
Jeff Opperman, and this is the first time I'm doing a video for my Substack, Track Some Mud, and I'm having a conversation with Adam Metz. So I'll do a brief introduction before we start. Adam is a musician, an educator, an advocate. He is the A in the multi-platinum band AJR. He's performed worldwide for millions of fans while using his reach and expertise to advance climate action. He recently published his debut book, Amplify,
Oh, wow, you have
which will be
Post-its in it.
it's got post-its, which we'll be talking about, but amplify how to use the power of connection to engage, take action, and build a better world. He's also the executive director of Planet Reimagined, a professor at Columbia University, and works with Congress on innovative energy policy. He was recently presented with Time Magazine's prestigious Earth Award and was named a changemaker by the New York Times. Now, one thing in my Substack, Tracks of Mud, I'm going to be wanting to talk about storytelling and using the power of music and culture and connection to connect with people on these issues. And so, given that introduction and given what you'll hear from Adam, I think you'll see why I wanted to talk to him as an amazing uh, demonstration of how to do this effectively. So, Adam, in your book, which I'll just show again, first time I showed it really quickly, Amplify, you wrote in your book, what we still need are powerful storytellers who are not constantly describing disastrous consequences, but sharing stories of a beautiful future and how we can build it together. So, can you talk about the role of storytelling in connecting with people to drive change? And in the book, you contrast good storytelling with effective storytelling. So, tell us
Yeah.
about
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for Track Some Mud. It's going to be great. I'm excited to see how that develops. Um, Good story versus effective stories. A good story, put simply, is one that you hear, at a party or really anywhere, and, makes you want to go home, tell your friends about it, tell your family about it. An effective story is one that makes you want to get up off your butt and actually take some action. There are real differences in those two things. You might think that the first one is interesting and shareable, and that the second one is direct driving to action. And those are the kinds of stories. Effective stories are the ones that actually mobilize people to things like voting, joining organizations, protesting, things like that. And we see the kinds of storytellers that bring good stories versus effective stories. Everyone, if you're in marketing, hears about this idea called a call to action, right?
that.
It's you tell a story about something, and then at the end you say, okay, now that you've learned this, here's your call
Mhm.
to action. But in reality, the call to action should be embedded throughout
Mhm.
the story, and the story should be strong enough so that the call to action doesn't need to be something separate. The story can move you enough to take that action when you finish hearing the story. And there's so many examples of this, and we can talk about it.
Well, uh, speaking of call to action, you also contrasted describing disaster and
Yeah.
danger and challenges versus building a vision of a beautiful future.
Yeah.
So how does that relate to galvanizing and motivating people?
Yeah, so there were a variety of different periods within the climate movement in terms of storytelling. I mean, you have Al Gore in Convenient Truth, where it was really about the education moment. That was the moment when many people who saw this movie were educated about the issue of global warming and climate change. You had, before the pandemic in 2018, 2019, that was the era of Greta and the Green New Deal where it was really based around fear and anger. You were able to galvanize a lot of people because they were angry and upset about what the future was going to look like. And now it's my view that we've moved all the people who are angry and upset to some sort of action. And then, in order to gain a bigger audience and to move a bigger audience, we need to use a different emotional tactic. So, this negative future, and you see this a lot on TV. There's a lot of post apocalyptic TV shows and movies about what a terrible future we're going to have. That reinforces inevitability. And
Mhm.
yes, you have people working to fight against it and to stop that from happening, but that really does reinforce in people's minds the idea that this future is inevitable. How are we going to figure out how to live in this future? But Now, what we need to focus on in order to build that larger audience and get more people engaged is what the future could look like. What's the positive potential? And so I've seen so many different projects around the world that are building what that future could look like. Even in my home city of New York City, a lot of changes have happened over the last bunch of years that are really concrete things that you can see. It's something beautiful, it's something creative, and it's something that impacts climate. People want more blue spaces and more green spaces in their city. People want, spaces that they can get away from heat waves. I mean, we've talked about this, but I pulled into Phoenix on tour and it was 109 degrees out, literally 109 degrees out, and people are still coming to shows, which is incredible. And thank you for coming to our show in Phoenix. Um, but to be able to imagine that concrete world, that's policy. That's something really specific that people can be advocating for.
Great. Well, okay. So thinking of call to action and actually making progress. In your book, you also reference the researcher Monique Mitchell Turner, and she
Yeah,
she was talking about how moral anger, so getting people upset, but moral anger is far more effective when it's paired with the belief that something can be done. So,
exactly.
thinking about that, how does that relate to you starting, co-founding Planet Reimagined?
Yeah, she's a researcher from Michigan, and this idea of moral anger is so important. But like I was saying before, anger as an emotion is only going to move a certain percentage of the population. It'll move a small percentage of the population really far, but it leaves this kind of gap for the people who want to work towards the solutions in a, optimistic, more positive sense. And Planet Reimagined came about because I saw a gap in the way that climate was being done. There's so many great organizations out there that do research, but research tends to be done at big organizations, universities, things like that, and then it tends to sit on a shelf. And at the same time, there are advocacy organizations and movement building organizations that do a lot of this kind of advocacy and movement building, but very rarely does that connect back to the research that is being done in these other places. So Planet Reimagined is built to do research with an eye towards how can we implement that as quickly as possible. And so we'll do academic level research, but also with a plan towards implementation. And whether that's through policy or working with companies or civil society, the big question here is why is there such a gap between the two? And so Planet Reimagine answer this question by creating these iterations where we'll do research, start to implement it, need to do more research in order to continue to implement it, need to do more research. It's more of this kind of feedback loop between the two as opposed to one is done and then it becomes the other. And I really, Jeff, appreciate all of your work with Planet Reimagined, working with our fellows. They had an incredible experience for many years working with you.
Well, and I, got to see firsthand that idea, that loop, that integration, integrating from earlier, from the early stages, working with the fellows. I'm thinking about there was a fellow who had great technical skills about sediment into the Mississippi Delta. She, really understood salinity wedges and all that. And then a different fellow had the artistic skills of landscape architecture and design, and they worked together. And he helped her create a really compelling infographic. So it was, integrating her technical skills about fluid mechanics and such, and sediment transport with his artistic skills. And then I remember another fellow that I worked with. He was working in the Danube, and he filmed himself with this woman who was cooking a traditional recipe using fish caught in the Danube Delta. And he used that as an opportunity to talk about the changes in the river and the fish and the availability of fish while she was chopping and cutting things up and making this stuffed peppers stuffed with this fish. And then he provides the recipe, so you can actually do the recipe and think about the Danube, watch the video. Yeah, so that was some, and then another fellow made a documentary about how to, it was a Supreme Court decision in Nepal that was going to be affecting the last free flowing river in Nepal. And he helped develop a documentary around that.
Yeah. I mean, we really appreciate all of your work and that idea that people came in with all of these different kinds of skill sets and yet were able to work on the same project. I mean, it very much is emblematic of me and a lot of what you do. I mean, you're a musician too, and you do all of this work in science. I'm a musician. That's how I spend a lot of my time, as you know. Um, how did we meet? This is a fun story, and it also relates back to this being fortuitous timing, right, for us filming this.
Right, right. So I was encouraging you to see if I could find time to have this conversation before World Fish Migration Day, which is
Yes.
Saturday, May 23rd. Mark your calendars, World Fish Migration Day. And that relates to how we did meet. So my daughter, Ren, is a huge fan of AJR. And she was telling me about you guys, and she was just saying that, oh, I would love to meet them. And then she mentioned that the A in AJR was getting his PhD in sustainability, and that he was an advocate, a policy advocate for the UN around climate. And I thought, oh, that overlaps some with my world. Like maybe I can help her out here. And so there that was right before World Fish Migration Day several years ago, and there was a music contest, a song contest, cleverly called Eurofission, and it was probably the world's first and only song competition for music about fish migration. And I said to her, I bet if you and your friends make a music video and it's based on an AJR song, um, I bet that will lead. I said, in fact, I didn't bet. I guaranteed. I said, if you do this, I guarantee you will meet Adam Met. And she's like, no, that sounds. How would you do that? I said, well, so I started thinking about it, and so I took the AJR song "Sober Up," and I created a song called "Swim On Up," and I just wrote the lyrics. I just wrote the lyrics that were about fish migration. I handed it to her and her friends. They did all the music, all the parts, all the filming, all the editing. They created this music video, and they wound up coming in second place in this song contest about fish migration. But along the way, I had to reach out to Adam a few times for various permissions and just to see if this was cool. Anyhow, that's how we started talking. And that led to me collaborating with Planet Reimagined on rivers and deltas and all that. So that, yes, and World Fish Migration Day is coming up. So that's how we met.
But I love this, the interaction of music and science and climate and the environment. Um, it's it's the way that honestly I've been the most productive in the work that I'm doing. And it's funny, I'm giving a university commencement speech in a week or two. And the whole theme of it is going to be you don't need to be one thing, right? You can take skills that you've learned in different places and apply them in other places. And that's how progress is made. When you were a little kid, you said, I want to be this when I grow up, right? And that probably changed 200 times as you were
Mhm.
growing up. And even for these students, as they're graduating college, they might think, oh, I want to be this when I grow up. And that's going to change 20 more times. And there's no shame in that. There's no embarrassment in that. To be able to do many different things and cross your skills. I mean, even as you were just saying, that people can come together and work on these projects if you have artistic skills, if you have scientific skills, if you have communication skills, if you have storytelling skills, etc. All of those roles are needed for effective projects.
Well, and it does seem like with if you're trying to communicate with the broader audiences, the ability to be not just one thing,
Yeah.
because almost guaranteed your audience is not whatever one thing you are. So
Yeah.
the ability to think and collaborate or have the perspective of these other ways of thinking and other ways of talking is very fundamental to being able to reach out and communicate with people.
Yeah, I agree. It's so funny. There are a lot of artists that I talk to, a lot of musicians who say, you know, I'm going to give my social media over to scientists and have the scientists talk about things. Um, but honestly, that's not really the best approach, right? To just give that
Hmm.
platform over to a scientist. A scientist generally is not somebody who's trained in communications and doesn't know how to speak effectively to the audience of that artist. The best way to do it is a conversation, like what we're
Mhm.
doing right
Mhm.
now, right? So if this artist knows something about climate change, let's take Billie Eilish, for example, right? She is a big climate change advocate. To be able to have these kinds of conversations with scientists and with policymakers, she is able to translate that for her audience as opposed to just saying, the policymaker or the scientist should be the communicator. Yes, of course, there are great communicators in the science world and great communicators in the policy world, but that's not everybody, in fact, not most of them. And so I think as we're making a lot of progress in the science world and in the policy world, to be able to partner with communicators effectively, I think that's how we're going to see real progress and people understanding the work that's being done.
Great. Well, let's talk about communicating with big groups.
Great.
And in your book, and I've heard you talk about how important it is for people to feel like they're part of something bigger, so a collective
Yeah.
whole, and how real world togetherness, being in person, being together, how that really can foster that, um, and how that can be harnessed to drive progress. So, can you talk about how Planet Reimagined focuses on concerts and sporting events
Yeah.
as opportunities to connect with people around issues like climate?
Absolutely. So Planet Reimagined is like an incubator. So we have a lot of different projects that we work on using the same philosophy that we talked about. And one of our projects is called Amplify. I actually stole the title of my book from this project because I liked it so much. We did a big study with Ticketmaster to determine how to do more effective advocacy at concerts and sports events. You're right, Jeff. Bringing people together in person, there's something so special about that. It's this term that Durkheim, the sociologist, called collective effervescence. And he wrote about this in the religious space, but this happens at concerts. Imagine you're at, a Taylor Swift concert or a Bruce Springsteen concert. Everyone, all the people who you don't know are all singing together, dancing together. There's an energy in the room. That's collective effervescence. And so what we did is we did a big study on how to capitalize on that and make that of use
Hmm.
for people to take direct action around a variety of different areas of focus. And so we focused a lot on climate, and so at a lot of different concerts, we embedded different organizations and worked with them on what the action should be. And when I say action, it's not pledging to do anything. It's not pledging to kind of change the kind of straw that you're using. It's not handing out pamphlets. It's not raising money. No, it's real concrete civic and political action. We had people calling their representatives on site at the concert, asking them to vote a certain way on certain bills. We had people signing petitions. And like Phoenix, for example, when I said it was 109 degrees out, on site, people were signing a petition to get the city council to unlock dollars to combat extreme heat, more tree cover, more cooling zones, things like that. Every single city is completely customized based on what that city needs. And when you gather people in person, they want to do things that are helping that community. That's what builds that community. So now we've done it on our tour on Billie Eilish with Tyler Childers, Renee Rapp. We just finished the Tame Impala tour in Europe. Um, so this is really, really expanding among artists doing this real kind of concrete work.
Great. Well, I want to pick up on that collective effervescence and go back to thinking about how I guaranteed to Ren that you will get to meet Adam. And about 3 years after that guarantee, there we were waiting to go backstage at an AJR concert. But the collective effervescence. So I've seen you a couple times, and I would say, that I definitely feel that in your crowds. And one thing that really struck me is and fascinated me. We often think about technology as something that's replacing people, replacing humanity, particularly with this dizzying expansion and emergence of AI. And now it feels like into so many aspects of our lives and futures. But your shows simultaneously dazzle with the range of technology, but they're also very human in terms of emotion and connection. So can you talk about how AJR integrates those elements and
Yeah.
how you're basically featuring superhuman, not superhuman, very, very human centric technology, which I think is interesting as we go forward to the future. It's not like we're not going to have technology, of course, but how do we keep making technology human and how to, serving
Yeah.
connection, not replacing it?
That's such a good question, and it's one that I grapple with every day as there's more and more adoption of AI around the world. All of these questions about data centers and energy and water, but also the technology replacing things like emotion. And that is kind of the key answer to your question. It's how do we continue to tap into human emotion as part of the stories we tell? That allows us to um, tell stories that incorporate creative, fun, and spectacle like technologies, but still focus on at the core how it makes people feel, right? So when our shows are being put together, we're thinking about it like a Broadway show. And this
Mhm.
is, Ryan, my middle brother, does most of this design. He thinks about it like, how do we take the audience on this journey during the show? We want them in the period of whatever, 90 minutes or 2 hours, to scream out of happiness, sing along with the lyrics. We also want them to cry. We also want them to get angry at something. We want to take them on that kind of roller coaster of emotions, because that's something that is so distinctly human, to go from one emotion to another to another to another. When you're thinking about technology, yeah, sure, you can, type into an AI platform, write me a story that will make me really happy and then make me cry and then make me angry. But there's something very different about in person. And like you said, collective effervescence, to do that with tens or hundreds or thousands of other people, there's an experience there that you're never going to get from doing it alone or getting an AI platform to do this. So, this emotion and the creativity of being together in person and experiencing something together, my bet is that over the next 5 years or so, we're going to see a move towards in person and a move away from digital. Yes, of course, we're still going to be using these digital tools, but Gen Z is buying fewer and fewer smartphones. And Gen A definitely are buying fewer and fewer smartphones. The phones, they're buying more and more dumb phones. There are fewer and fewer of them who are using social media. And I think this is a great thing. I think there's benefits to all of those, and they should be one part of a larger ecosystem that we're experiencing. But we're seeing, I mean, Live Nation sold more tickets last year than they've ever sold before. I mean, that's
Mhm.
also a question of, you know, some other things. But I think that seeing in person content is where the future is heading.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and the experience of being in a concert surrounded by other people is hard to replicate in any other way. And as long as that, that is often what gives me hope when I think about, how are we going to stay
Yeah.
connected to each other and appreciating what really values. And often it's experiences like concerts that make me feel that is still going to be a big part of our future.
Yeah.
Um, but okay, speaking of, you referenced social media, but we've been talking about how to use these tools to be pushing forward connection and ideas and exchange and not replacing them. So you started making TikTok videos of
Yeah.
you making different recipes. Um, and you note that it was a great way to connect with people, build your audience, get more people paying attention. And for my Substack, I'm thinking about something similar. People love music, art, and food. How do I use those things as a bridge to start thinking about a bridge to delivering content and ideas? With your recipe videos, did you just use them to get people to come in and then they'd be in proximity to something else you did that had content? Or did you actually, sneak in some climate or environmental angle as you were doing a recipe?
Yeah. Some of both, but I think the latter um, was really important, right? So obviously, I study climate, I work in climate, I did my PhD half while I was on the road on tour. But then when I was backstage, you're referring to these videos where I had this kind of one pot and I took ingredients that I found locally, either in the venue or from surrounding stores, and just made like a one pot dinner and was talking about the different ingredients. And some of my materials I was using were more sustainable. I talked about some of the foods that were grown locally. And all of that was done not to, educate people formally about sustainability, but it was part of the story, right? So it was something that people care about, like you said, food. I was backstage at the venue, and so my tools were very restricted. My environment was very restricted, so there were some steaks. People were interested in those steaks, not like cooking steak, but the steaks of the video, and cooking to make sure I didn't set anything on fire and didn't burn anything backstage. Um, and at the same time, it was a little bit of a learning experience. So I was very intentional to not make it over educational, right? Not try and shove information down people's throats, but have them learn something a little bit as they were learning. And honestly, those videos did some of the best of any content I ever posted. So when I go back on tour next time, maybe I'll do it again.
Right. And are you guys going back on tour this summer? Is that
We're
starting?
doing a handful of shows this
Okay.
summer. I am in San Francisco right now. We're playing Bottle Rock in Napa. We're doing a bunch of kind of random festivals and fairs. We're doing a couple nights at Red Rocks
Ooh,
in
nice.
Colorado at the end of June. I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, that would be incredible. Just thinking about how you guys the spectacle and the connections. And I just wanted to add one thing. Thinking about your concerts. um, you're playing bigger arenas, and so some of the spectacle is a way to make sure you can really reach people, because people might be
Yeah,
far away and you would
yeah,
just be little dots. But then you do things like pop up in the upper deck with
yeah.
guitars and ukuleles, and you're up there in a group of people singing. And it just brings it right to the level of a smaller place, or direct connection. And there was all that dialogue that you had with audience members. So that's what, you were bringing some of these elements of the smaller club, even as much of what you had was this spectacle. But anyhow, I know that we are running out of time. Any last thoughts? Or maybe I think we're running out of time. So,
But Jeff, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for having
yeah,
me, and I'm really excited to check out Tracks of Mud. It's going to be great.
yeah, thanks. And I'm really glad that Ren, pushed me to find a way to connect with you. And here we are having this conversation. So,
Me
have a
too.
great time at this concert in Napa. And thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you, Jeff. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.